Hello everyone. Today is going to be the last video for this chapter. There's no new material here. We're just going to be kind of reviewing the major concepts from this chapter in order to get you ready for the chapter test. So we're going to go through, really there's three big ideas from the chapter. We're going to go through them and do a few examples for each, and then you'll be reviewing in class before we actually take the test. So the first big idea was that to simplify expressions, we need to distribute and we need to combine like terms. Now, the most common issues I see here is that we need to remember that when we distribute, we're always using multiplication. And when we're combining like terms, we're using addition or subtraction, depending on what the signs are in the particular problem. Okay, so our directions say to simplify the following expressions. Now remember, if I'm simplified, it means there are no parentheses and there are no like terms. If you have either of those two things in an expression, it hasn't been fully simplified. So let's go ahead and look. For number one, there's no parentheses to take care of, so I can jump right into combining my like terms. Now the first term I have here is 3x squared, but since no other term has an x squared in it, I know that's kind of a loner, so I'm going to leave that aside for right now. So now I look and I see I have a negative 4x and I have a positive 2x. So I'm going to add those coefficients together. I'm going to add negative 4 plus 2. Please be very careful with your signs here. Don't guess on this. That gives us a negative 2x. Now I see that I have some constants here. I have a positive 7 minus 8. Again, I'm going to subtract those because I see that minus. So 7 minus 8 gives me a negative 1. And then I'm just going to go ahead and bring that 3x squared down. And that would be my simplified expression. For number 2, I see parentheses, which tells me I need to distribute. So I'm going to distribute. Again, that means multiplication. So the first thing I'm going to do is negative 2 times a positive 3 is a negative 6x. Now, I also have to multiply this constant by the second term in the parentheses, which means I have to do a negative 2 times a negative 4, which I know gives me a positive 8. Now, in 3 and 4, you'll notice I have parentheses in both of those. We're always going to distribute before we start combining any like terms. So I'm going to make a note that we must distribute before combining like terms. I can't start combining anything until all the parentheses are gone. So I'm going to go ahead and do that distributing. Again, I'm multiplying, so I have 3 times 2 is 6, and the x comes along. 3 times a negative 1 is a negative 3. And then I'm going to bring down the positive 4x. Now I look for my like terms. I have 6x and a positive 4x, which is going to give me 10x, and then I can bring down the minus 3. All right, the next thing, we just have to be careful with the number 4 here because we actually need to distribute twice. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Negative 2 times a positive 4 is a negative 8x. Negative 2 times a positive 7 is a negative 14. Now I'm distributing a positive 3, so I have a positive 3 times a positive 2 gives me a positive 6x, and a positive 3 times a negative 1 gives me a negative 3. Now that all of those parentheses are gone, I can combine my like terms. So I see I have these terms with the x. I have a negative 8x plus 6x. If I combine them, that gives me a negative 2x. Then I have some constants here. A negative 14 minus 13, or excuse me, negative 14 minus 3 is a minus 17. So that was our first big idea. Once we were proficient with that skill, we moved on to solving equations. So first we were working with expressions that don't have equal signs, and now we moved on to solving equations. And we said we knew we had to solve by using those inverse or opposite operations. Now, a big idea here, we know a lot of the equations we came across had one solution, so the answer looked like x equals a number. But we know some equations have no solutions, or we can have infinitely many solutions. All right, so number 5 is an example just of a one step, and I actually want you to change this because this is an issue that comes up all the time. If I have let's say it's actually a negative 2x equals 8, so add a negative here. What happens a lot of times is people think that they should add 2 to both sides. However, we need to remember that this really says negative 2 times x, and in order to undo multiplication, we need to divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2. Since the coefficient was negative, I need to divide by that same negative number. Those are going to cancel, and I'm going to get an answer of x equals negative 4. Now remember, some of you have been doing this in your work. You can always check your answers. So if my original equation was negative 2x equals 8, I could check it by substituting this negative 4 in for my x. So instead of negative 2 times x, I would do negative 2 times negative 4. In this case, a negative times a negative is a positive. 2 times 4 is 8, so I do get the correct answer. So on the test, it would be a great idea to check your answers to make sure you're correct before you turn it in. Okay, for number 6, now we have a two-step equation. When I have a two-step equation, the first thing I'm going to do is find the side that has the variable, which in this case is the left side. Now, I know I need to get rid of this constant before I can start doing anything with the x. So since this is a positive 3, I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. Here I'll have x divided by a negative 2, and here I have 7 minus 3 is equal to 4. Now, what I'm left with here is division. X is being divided by a negative 2. To do the opposite of division, to undo that division, I need to multiply by negative 2. Again, I'm multiplying by the same number that was in the denominator. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Then these numbers are going to cancel out, and I get x equals a negative 8. All right, next is our multi-step equation. So I actually have to, before I can really start getting into the solving, I need to simplify that left side, just like we did at the top. So again, the first thing I need to do is distribute. So a negative 2 times 3x gives me a negative 6x. A negative 2 times a positive 4 gives me a minus 8. And then I'm going to bring down the 9x. And over here I still have 21. Now, that left side I'm not done simplifying because I still see I have some like terms. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of those next. Negative 6x plus 9x gives me a 3x. I bring down my minus 8, and I have a positive 21. The nice thing now is that we're back to our regular old two-step equations. So again, I find the side that has the variable, and I know I need to move the constant first, that number by itself. So since this is a minus 8, I have to do the opposite. So I'm going to add 8 to both sides. So this is going to go away, and I get 3x is equal to 29, which seems a little strange, so I'm just going to make sure I haven't made any mistakes. Okay, I think I'm okay. So I'm going to divide by 3 now to undo that. Now this looks strange. I get x equals 29 over 3, but sometimes that just happens in a problem. It doesn't mean that we've done anything wrong. And again, we could use our calculator to check and see that we've actually done this correctly. All right, last but not least is our variables on both sides. Now, it does not matter which side you move the variable to. I generally like to move my variable to the left, and that means that this 4x needs to get moved over. Since this is a positive 4x, I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. So 6x minus 4x leaves me with 2x plus 2. These are going to cancel, and I have a negative 8 on the right-hand side. And again, now we're just back to our two-step equation. I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, which gives me 2x equals a negative 10. My last step is to divide both sides by 2, and x is equal to a negative 5. Okay. Let's flip over and we'll cover the last big idea. Now, we actually didn't do big idea number 3, so we're going to cross that off. The last thing we need to talk about is the idea of translating verbal phrases into expressions and equations. So using all those keywords that we had from that table. Okay, now if I look at 11, I see the sum of 3 and a number is 10. This is really important because that tells me I have an equation. Now, on the left side of that equation, I have the sum, which I know is addition, of 3 and a number. So I'm adding 3 plus n, and on the right side, all I have is 10, so that's what's going to go on the right side of my equation. Now, for number 12, I don't have an is, so this is going to be an expression. There's going to be no equal sign. Now, when I see the word product, I know that means multiplication. Again, I'm going to use n for my number, so the product of a 4 and a number is just going to look like 4n. So hopefully this quick review was helpful for you. Again, when we're in class, you're going to work through a review that's going to be a mirror of your test to make sure that we're all ready for this chapter test. All right, thanks for hanging in with this video. Make sure your notes are complete, and I'll see you in class.